story by unfathomably dense Reddit. I've had 3 pretty specific things happen to me that have made me a believer. First, when I was 17 in high school doing the school play, we had a classic haunted auditorium. A janitor or something had hung himself from one of the catwalks, and while it sounded kinda typical and cliché, I generally wrote it off as being BS. That said, I could never bring myself to go upstairs, even before knowing the story, because the air up there was so heavy and unsettling, and it always felt like someone was watching you up there. Nobody ever liked to go up there alone. But there was one night we were doing a performance and a few of my castmates and I were in a circle talking backstage while we waited for our cues. And as I was saying something, all of a sudden it felt like a lot of some kind of thick, viscous fluid dripped from the catwalk above all over the side of my head. Everyone I was talking with got really quiet as it happened and just stared at me as I tried to wipe it away. Even as I started wiping at it, it felt like it was just vanishing into thin air, and my hand came away dry. When I asked if anyone else saw it, they all just quietly nodded and looked really spooked. IDK if it was something residual from the man hanging himself, or if it was some kind of ectoplasm thing or what, but I know for a fact that it wasn't anything natural that hit my head that night. All I do know is that I was standing directly underneath the spot where the man was supposed to have hung himself. The second time that comes to mind was from a year earlier, when my older sister was regularly taking me to a group with her that practiced energy work and energetic healing. We would go once or twice a week and practice doing energy work with other people, learning to focus our intentions and receiving attunements to the use of different frequencies of energy work that could be put to different uses. It was a lot of fun, a lot of meditation, and we would work in a new form of energy every 2 or 3 weeks. To this day, it was by far the deepest meditative state I've ever been in my life. I was definitely conscious, I know that much. I snore like a motherfucker, LOL, someone would have woken me up if I'd fallen asleep. And we were there for over an hour. Eventually, though, everything around me gradually melted away, and I began to feel the presence of several beings around the room who circled us curiously for a bit before they came closer. They talked with each other and whispered to us, and after a while 1 or more of them even began to play with my hair. It sounds creepy, I'm sure, but their presence was so comforting and relaxing, and they were so obviously benevolent and curious about us, that it continues to be one of, if not the most spiritually moving experience of my life. Finally, the last one is from my late 20s. Now, about 5 years prior to this last experience, me, my ex, and a friend of ours were all very into the Book of Mormon, the musical, when it came out, and eventually we started to wonder how much of the content of the musical was actually true to the beliefs of the Mormon Church. Now, keep in mind, we smoked a lot of weed in those days, but rather than just looking it up online like normal people, we decided to go and attend one of their church services. Long story short, we ended up meeting regularly with missionaries to learn about the church, and were eventually baptized and became members. Of course, we had to claim belief multiple times in various aspects of their faith to get to that point, which we had exactly none of, but we were there to learn, so naturally we lied. And as far as the Mormons were concerned, we were as devout as could be for a little over 2 years. Now, this was a couple years before beginning my gender transition. So as someone who was considered male, I was able to receive what they called a priesthood. There are 2 of them, and I was eligible for the first, being a newly baptized man in the church, and they planned to covey it to me during a sacrament meeting. That's what they call a church service. Well, several of the older men, they're called elders, took me to the front of the congregation and sat me down in a chair, and they all placed one hand on my head or shoulder, and the other hand on the man next to them's shoulder, and they began to pray. I was shocked to realize, after having had so many of them in my teens, that these men were giving me an energy attunement. Not that any of them would have known what that meant, because that was exactly what it felt like. For the record, an energy attunement feels like having a new kind of energy flow over and into you, and allowing you to become accustomed with it so that you can tune in to that frequency. Anyway, fast forward to 27 post-transition, and I'm visiting a friend from high school who lives nearby that I haven't seen in 7 or 8 years. Eventually, she tells me that she's been haunted by something that's followed her for the last year or more, and the spirit is definitely malevolent and has taken up residence in the room adjacent to her and her boyfriend's bedroom. My friend had grown up in the Mormon church, and after talking with her about my own experiences in the church, we talked about my receiving the first of the 2 levels of priesthood, and I talking about how it compared to my experiences with energy work. All those years of energy work had made me especially sensitive to energies, both positive and negative around me, and I had felt the entity's presence from the moment I walked into their place. I just hadn't realized exactly what it was yet until she finally told me. At the time, I have no idea what possessed me to make the offer, but feeling the presence of that entity and having heard some of her experiences with it, I offered to help her be rid of it. I had never done anything like that before, but my friend was suffering because of it, and I couldn't just allow it to continue. So we started by praying together, saying prayers and blessings from the Bible and the Book of Mormon, because she was most familiar with those. And for a little while the spirit became angry with us, and the air around us got hot, and I could feel absolute contempt from it as I began trying to banish it and tell it that it wasn't welcome. Now I knew enough about energy work to know how to shield myself from feeling too much of what it was trying to dish out, but it still made a good effort. But after about 15 minutes of approaching it from the aspect of a fire and brimstone, you shall not pass kind of attempt and not getting much of anywhere except gaining its ire, I realized that rather than trying to banish the spirit, I should have been trying to show it comfort and inviting it to leave, not as an unwanted guest, but as a wounded soul who needed to find its own to heal outside of tormenting my friend through its own suffering. IDK how I came to that conclusion exactly, but it was just something I could feel. So we redirected our attempt and began invoking loving and gentle spirits, mother goddesses from various old religions. We called on gods and goddesses alike whose domains were comfort and love and protection. We called angels to look after and guide this hurt entity to a place where it could recover itself in peace. At first it seemed confused, and its agitation with me faltered, and it seemed to get more curious about me than anything. Last we invoked the name of Hestia, the Greek goddess of the hearth and a protector of the home, to watch over my friend's house and to keep her safe and unwanted spirits out. When all was said and done, the entity was gone, and the air in her home felt lighter, and it was easier to breathe, and for a little while she just cried on my shoulder and thanked me for helping. I was just in shock that I'd been able to. After over an hour of effort and trying to coax that spirit to leave, I was tired and needed to go home to rest. I'd never been quite so mentally and spiritually tired as I was that night, and I needed to rest. But the second I got in my car, I could feel that the entity hadn't moved. I won, but instead left the home and just waited for me to come out so that it could latch onto me. It just felt like a chill wrapped itself around me as I sat there, and I very much had the image of a wounded hyena in my back seat, sitting there with the expectation of me being able to help it. But it felt wrong in its intention, like it wanted to latch onto me and feed on the positive and loving energy I had shown it like some kind of tick. I immediately began putting those defenses back in place, and calmly talking with it and explaining that it couldn't come with me, because I couldn't help it do anything more than to move on from its physical attachments, and that it had to find its own way from there. It stayed with me the whole way home, and even with the heater going in my car, I was still cold. Eventually I got home, got out of the car, and told it that in no uncertain terms was it welcome in our house, and that it needed to leave. I repeated it like a mantra on the way to the front door, and did everything I possibly could to create a spiritual distance between myself and the entity, right up until I opened the door. I took one step inside, turned around, looked straight at where I could feel it staring at me from outside, and said firmly, "You are not welcome. Goodbye." I closed the door and immediately pressed my hand to the back of the door and began saying my own blessing over the house, again invoking Hestia to watch over my home and to keep us safe. But even as I did, I felt something slam into the door from the other side, and it physically shook against my hand. I repeatedly blessed and invoked protections over the house and myself for the next week, because I just felt it lurking at the edges of my awareness, like it was looking for a way in and to get closer to me. Eventually I stopped feeling it there and assumed it must have moved on, hopefully, and found some level of comfort and peace for itself. Story by Ask_Alice. When I was a kid, we lived in a big old house that had been converted into an upstairs-downstairs duplex, but it was all family living there. One morning I was awake but still in bed, and I saw this really fancy-looking couple walk through my wall, across my room, and through the other wall. I told my mom about it, and she had me describe the people. Turns out 3 other members of the family had seen the lady I saw, but I was the only one who ever saw the husband. Later on, I found out that my mom and 2 aunts used a Ouija board, and the ghost said her name was Emily. They confirmed through town records that an Emily had lived there and was buried in the town cemetery a couple miles away. Story by Bim2. Lived in a house that from the first day we set foot in it, things were happening all the time. But we loved that house. We loved living there, had tons of parties, and lots of paranormal experiences that on at least one occasion got physical. Weird thing was, despite oodles of stories about our time in this house, I didn't have a point of reference for what was going on. I just knew that things were happening. Years later, as I was talking with an old schoolmate from that time period, mid-1970s, I asked her if our house was haunted. She was like, "OMG, yes," and began recounting just her experiences when she visited and/or spent the night. So that's when I gained a point of reference. Oh, so our house was haunted, and that explains all the weird happenings. Duh. One of the strangest things that occurred was several months after we moved in. Our father was surveying the doors on the house, all sliding glass, and decided they were not secure enough. So he had someone come in and attach slide latches at the top and bottom of each set of doors. 2 doors each entry, 6 entryways on just the ground floor. Do the math. A lot of latches. The next morning he came down to all those latches being cut from the inside. So then our parents were like, okay, maybe we should have an exorcism performed, but ultimately decided against it. We heard voices late at night when everyone was asleep, and they'd talk loud enough to wake me anyway. Full-bodied apparitions of a man and a woman, very obvious footsteps through our parents' bedroom, and more, but it would take too long.